Welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I am Trevor Scott, reporting again from Santa Ynez, California.
Matt Giraldi reporting from Southern California, but not outside.
All right, and today we're going to be getting into Tier 1 tight ends. So we'll be going over the first four tight ends and discussing the strategy and then the specific players who we like the best, who we think you should draft and when. Sharing screen here and getting these four tight ends are Travis Kelce, Sam LaPorta, Mark Andrews, and Trey McBride. Um, this is a unique year for tight end because this top tier hasn't been this deep in 10 years. There was Jimmy Graham and then kind of Gronk at the same time. Gronk started maybe a little bit after Jimmy Graham, and then Kelsey's just been dominant for so long that over the last 10 years we've just had these elite tight ends that have been far and away above the rest of the group, and it's been clear that they're going to be, so going into drafts you want this major advantage, positional advantage anyways at tight end that you can't get necessarily at other positions, and these guys would get pushed way up the board, into the first round a lot of times. Overall, having this deep of a tier, we're going to see a different draft strategy around tight end this season, because now we're going to see them get pushed down the board as there are more available in this tier, and you'll see maybe the first one go off in round 3 and of Superflex League. Let me specify that, right? So the first one going off middle of round 3, probably in Superflex, maybe middle of round 2 in non-Superflex, and then all the way down to Mark Andrews in round 6, maybe round 5, depending on your league. But in Superflex leagues, he'll be down in round 6. So that's as late as or McBride, depending on how you have that ranked. But that's as late as we've seen tier 1 tight ends go. And so, when you're considering early in the draft, and you don't want to necessarily get in on Kelce so early anymore when Mark Andrews is going to be available so late. So that's the overall look at this position. Anything that you want to add in terms of the scope of
Yeah,
what we're looking at here from tight end?
I I think from the perspective of drafting, it makes things a lot easier this year because last year, when we were doing mock drafts or getting into the actual draft season, it was, do I want to take Travis Kelsey or do I want to take like a CD Lamb or an AJ Brown? And that was a huge decision that you had to make to give up, a premium guy at a different position. Now looking at this year with a deeper class, if I'm targeting, let's say, Mark Andrews and it's in the 5th or the 6th, then, that's the type of round where, you might already have, your starting guys filled out. There's not as much risk involved this year. And, obviously the narrative can change as the season goes on, but from a drafting perspective, a lot less stressful going in than deciding if I want to spend that first round pick on Kelsey or just completely wait.
Yeah, I totally agree. And adding to the reduction in stress is that the tier 2 guys are going to follow suit, right? Like, you're not going to have to reach for a tier 2 guy. Those guys are also all going to get pushed down the draft. And so, you're looking down in round 7 for a guy like Evan Ingram, maybe even 8 for Evan Ingram. Like, Dalton Kincaid's going in around 7 or 8 as well. Like, Kittle's going around 9. Like, these guys are all going to get pushed down. So if you decide you want to wait on tight end, you're still also additionally not going to have the struggle that you've had in the past to try and hit on a high upside play, or hit on somebody who's been doing well in camp, or hit on somebody that looks like they're going to be the number one option in a bad offense, a la Darren Waller last year. So there's going to be a unique feel to this year's tight end draft that most of the people playing or most of the people listening uh, haven't been involved in. So I'm excited to draft tight end this year. I'm excited to get into these players as well now. So the first guy we'll get into has just been the king of the position for the last 5+ years, Travis Kelce. I currently have him as my top tight end. Matt has him as his number 2 tight end. You can see the rankings here last year. He finished 3rd overall, which was a major crack in the in the armor for him because he had just been 1st or 2nd every year. Production was down, but he also came into the year hurt. He missed week 1. Was struggling with getting healthy, and he got hurt like the week the season was supposed to start too. It wasn't like he had this long-term injury that was limiting his reps. He got hurt right before the season started, um, but still worked his way into 117 targets. Um, had a very productive season, 93, 984 and 5. That's going to be really difficult to match just for anybody. And the 5 is really where he was down, obviously, why he didn't produce as well, because he only had 5 touchdowns. Like 2 years ago, he had a game where he had 3 touchdowns. So seeing 5 touchdowns really limited his upside last year. But I think that the offense is going to be better overall. I think their defense is going to regress so that they're going to have to throw more. And even if he does dial back his total snaps, I don't think that that's necessarily going to limit him from a production standpoint. It might just, he's not going to be on the field as much as he has been, but when he is, he'll be targeted on the same amount of plays as he was in past years. So I expect him to be very good. You can see, Fantasy Pros has him ranked as the number 2 tight end with almost 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. So if he does that, I think that he has a very good chance at being the number 1 tight end.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying with, the snap count. Maybe it's going to be down a little bit, and they talked about that. But you hear these quotes where, I'm going to go until the wheels fall off. He's going to play, at 100% every time he's on the field. And it's one of those things where, yeah, maybe you can talk yourself into the narrative of age and less snaps, but when he's running over the middle and he's open, Mahomes isn't going to just look the other way because he wants to save him for the playoffs. Like he's going to be, dominant when he's out there. And, I still have him number 2 for now, but I do understand why you pushed him up. But I'm really excited to see, how he performs this year. And obviously the longevity of the tight end position isn't, like the others where they do have a longer lifespan. So yeah, I think, even if they limit his snaps and like you said too, with the defense probably regressing, Mahomes is going to have to throw the ball more. And, when we end up
Yeah.
talking about the QBs, we'll kind of get into that. But yeah, man, I think it's wheels up, and his mindset is he's just going to run himself into the ground the next couple of years.
Yeah. And I guess maybe this is just a bias too. I just would be very excited to have Kelce on my team. And when you can get him in the 5th round, it doesn't feel right. Right. I mean, it's just, he's been so expensive for so long. And now he's falling off because he had, a down season where he was dealing with injuries. I think, as long as he's healthy, we're going to see a very good and productive player here. So very excited about Kelce. And like you said, I mean, you have him 2. It's not like you have him 5. So you're still, in on him where he's going. And so jumping over then into our next tight end here, Sam LaPorta. I have him as tight end 2. Matt, you have him as tight end 1. He is the consensus tight end 1 going into this year amongst expert rankers. And as the projection shows on Fantasy Pros here, he's projected as the number 1 tight end. So last year he finished as the number 1 tight end as a rookie as well. So like we just never see that ever, which is, obviously building a lot of the confidence going into year 2 that he can do it again. A lot of targets. He's the number 2 option in the passing game. Very, very good passing game here in Detroit. And you can see his numbers here. Major touchdown total here with 10 as a rookie. So if he's going to continue to be that red zone threat, and he can score kind of from anywhere on the field too. He had quite a few touchdowns outside the red zone in that 10 as well. So kind of a nightmare or a matchup nightmare all over the field. And my only reservation on him is I do expect Jameson Williams to be more involved this year. So it's not like that's going to affect the tight end numbers, the tight end targets. It shouldn't anyways. But my thought process being that if he isn't just the clear 2 with nobody really being the 3, because it was kind of the run game with LaPorta and Amon-Ra last year. That was kind of their whole offense. I think that there might be a touchdown regression, even if there is an improvement in volume. So you see the projection down here. He's got 84, 850, and 8. That 8 touchdown projection is kind of what fuels the number 1 tight end ranking here. And so if he doesn't quite get there, if he scores 5 this year instead, he's going to end up being behind Kelce.
Yeah, and I don't foresee myself getting a lot of LaPorta just because he's kind of in that range where I'm probably going to take someone, like a Derrick Henry or, maybe if Ayuk gets pushed down on the board, just given the depth of the position. But, we saw his ability to coexist with St. Brown and kind of both those guys be those target monsters. And, like you said, I do think Jameson is going to take a step forward this year, and I do think they believe in him. But they didn't really bring anyone else in. Like when we were looking at the mock drafts heading into the actual draft, we saw from time to time them targeting, high end receiver, but it kind of shows that they've got their core trio, and LaPorta is, the number two, and unlike Kelce, he's got youth on his side, which I think is kind of pushing him up the board as well. And there's always kind of that like,
Hmm.
if he did this as a rookie, just imagine what he can do as a sophomore. But I don't think that he's gonna like explode past those numbers that he had last year. I think where his projections are, I'm pretty comfortable with. Um, but yeah, I'm excited for the Lions as a unit this year. I
Yeah.
hope they can make another deep run because Dan Campbell's awesome to watch. Sorry, side tangent there.
Yeah, yeah, he is so fun. It's like impossible to hate him. And I mean, I'm
Yeah.
a Packer fan, and I don't even hate this team or hate the Lions. So it's I think like you said, he's young. It's an exciting prospect. It's not like he was a fifth round pick either, like Kelce, and then like
Right.
exploded, or like Gronk, and then exploded. Like he was an early second round pick, and so to see him produce right away and to see how big of an impact he made, even in week one, he had like 7 targets in week one last year. Like it was clear he was going to be the dude on this offense at tight end. So I think there's a lot to be excited about here. And again, like if he was going second amongst tight ends in the fifth round of Superflex leagues, I'd be a lot more in. It's just he never goes there. So it's one of
Yeah.
those things again where it's like this tier of tight ends. It's interesting because where you decide to get in on one of these guys is going to determine kind of who you like, and waiting is going to be my favored strategy at this, just because I feel like all these guys could be the number one guy. So
And just to
um,
add, I mean, we've talked about this before, but the importance of curating your own rankings because, in this situation, Trevor's probably not going to end up with a lot of Laporta. And in our episode where we broke down tier two of running back, I was kind of on the same tune with Gibbs, where he's ranked a little bit lower than consensus. So make sure you curate your own rankings and mock draft accordingly because there's going to be a lot of guys that fall to your spot because other people view them differently.
yeah, make sure that you kind of have your rankings set and tiered so that when you can strike at certain positions. So make sure that you have that kind of set up. So if you're looking at your positions, right, and there's one guy left in the tight end tier, but you have 3 or 4 guys left in your wide receiver tier, say that you go tight end, and then you can grab a different guy at receiver from one of your tiers in the next round. So that's definitely important to look at. All right, so getting into the next tight end here, Mark Andrews. We both have him at number 3. Tight end 13 last year, obviously got hurt at the end of the year, major ankle injury. So, his numbers are all going to be down. But if you look at his PPR points per game, 11 and a half, basically right there with the other tight ends. He only played 10 games. So, in terms of when he was on the field, he was still producing at a good rate. Maybe a little disappointing compared to what we would have been expecting, but to score 6 touchdowns in 10 games is a lot of scoring, right? And that's kind of the point here is with Lamar. Him and Lamar have a very solid connection, and he's going to be their go-to guy kind of at all levels, but also in the red zone specifically when he can really be a difference maker with scoring touchdowns. So I expect him to be very good again this year. I have seen um, different people not be as high on him and say, like, he doesn't have a path to this um, high level of production, but I don't know that I agree with that. I think, that if you're looking at the top tier, that he really is somebody who's established and has produced at a high level and has, been the number one tight end as recently as a couple of years ago. So I think that with the player here, that I expect him to be fully healthy. He did make it back in the playoffs last year. In this projection here of 71, 861, and 9, I think is something that he can hit. And, the 9 touchdowns is the major thing, right? If he gets up to that close to double digits, he's going to be extremely productive, and you're going to wish that you had drafted him in the 6th round because he's currently going after Trey McBride in a lot of drafts.
Yeah, and this kind of the opposite of Laporta is someone that I'm going to have on a lot of my teams, just given his ADP. And, I don't really understand the narrative right now of all the Mark Andrews hate. Maybe just like you said, people have gotten burned by him in terms of the injury thing, but he's back and healthy, and he has a very good connection with Lamar. And I know you and I both like Zay Flowers this year, but obviously they're very different players. They don't really have a whole lot of other receiving options. This is going to be a very concentrated offense with, him, Flowers, Lamar, and obviously Derrick Henry. So
No
yeah,
Bateman.
I don't really understand. I'm so done with Bateman.
We'll get into him
He had a
later.
good, yeah, oh yeah.
Draft
No
Bateman if you
more
want to
Bateman.
lose. So just put it that way. Yeah.
Don't draft Bateman. If you're thinking about drafting Bateman, take a rookie and be patient. I'm sorry.
So going back to Andrews though, to continue to build on him and the offense, right? You said it's going to be concentrated, and I agree because like we talked about it with Flowers and the team in the Baltimore team preview, that Flowers' production and targets and everything didn't really change when Andrews went out, right? It feels like the
Mhm.
receivers have their kind of set target share and that the tight ends have their set target share. So I really don't think that a developing Zay Flowers is going to impact Mark Andrews. I think if Flowers becomes a more productive and explosive player, that's going to come from the targets that the wide receivers get as a whole, right? And they're going to concentrate more on Flowers. So I think Andrews is not going to be affected by a rise in Flowers production.
Agreed.
Yeah. So all right. So Andrews 3, and again he goes 4th in ADP currently. And so like we both said, it just feels like he's the one that's gonna get drafted the most by each of us. Not to say that these other again, not to say that these other players aren't worth their spots. It's just when you're looking at your tiers and your rankings, you can kind of load up at your other positions and then get Andrews, who you still feel very confident in this tier of tight end. So getting into the last tight end that we're going to be talking about here is Trey McBride. So we both have him at number 4. And last year he was tight end 9. He had 105 targets, 81 catches, 825 yards and 3 touchdowns. This is a little skewed though from last year because he had Zach Ertz, who he was contending with. So unlike Sam LaPorta, who kind of took over as the lead tight end that very first day or that very first game, he had to contend with Zach Ertz all the way until like week 8 or week 9 until they moved off Ertz, or Ertz got hurt and then they moved off Ertz and kind of turned it over to McBride. And then he was a monster after that. He kind of turned into Kyler's favorite target, took over completely from Marquise Brown, who became kind of obsolete in the offense, and was one of the top 2 tight ends over the second half of the season. So, he has a ton of upside here, and he showed that he could be the top option at tight end last year. The only problem here with that kind of upside, obviously, is that they drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. So if he's going to be commanding 140 targets in the way that Marquise Brown wasn't able to over McBride this coming year, the offense is just going to look a lot different than it did when he was succeeding. So, I could still see him settling in as the number 2 option. I could still see him being very productive. He gets the full season this time. But the number of 20-point games that we're going to see from him, like we did in the second half of last year, I just think aren't going to really be as plentiful this coming year.
Yeah, I think it's kind of buyer beware with Trey McBride, honestly. I mean, I'm obviously very high on Harrison, and all the reports is that he's already established himself as the true alpha on the team. And you're right, last year when Kyler came back, the offense was just kind of strange overall. They were just feeding McBride on every play, and I think it's going to look quite a bit different. And they brought in Zay Jones too, who's not like a world beater, but there are kind of some other mouths to feed. But I'm kind of fading McBride, and he is the number 4 for me. He's kind of the end of this tier, but I don't think he's someone I'm going to be targeting quite a bit, because looking into the next tier and what I could get at this ADP, I think I'm going to go in a different direction. But yeah, I mean, he is a stud. Like, I think he's going to be a good year. I don't know. I'm a little bit hesitant. Just I don't know.
Yeah, I'm hesitant too. He's really difficult, and I put this in the next slide here, but he's a difficult player to evaluate because, like you said, you could just not take the risk and wait and get somebody later in the draft, right? And just get somebody that you feel is more established at a better price. But where he's going, if we're wrong about the role that he's going to get, and he is going to have, um, the similar upside in an 8 target per game type of role, like we're going to be wrong here, and he's going to
Yeah.
be a top 2 tight end. Um, and they have him projected for 4 touchdowns, which is why he's projected as the 4th tight end, but he could easily double that. And if he does, then it turns into a thing where he's just as highly projected as all these other 3 guys that we just talked about. So, um, I don't want to completely say I'm going to fade McBride. And obviously, we're saying that his upside is capped by Marvin Harrison Jr., but there's a chance, anyways, that it's not capped so much that he's going to end up being for sure behind these guys. So, I still feel comfortable including him in this tier. I still would no doubt draft him over anybody else at tight end. If he does fall 3 rounds, and we're in the 6th round looking at McBride or Dalton Kincaid or McBride or Evan Engram, that tier of tight end, or even Kyle Pitts, the next 3 guys kind of in the rankings, I'm still like taking McBride, no doubt. So that I think we're down on him, but we're not so down on him that we're just like not gonna take him at all. So
And that's totally fair. I mean, for me, I've seen him as the number 3 tight end quite a bit, and at
yeah,
that price point, I'm going to be fully out. But I get what you're saying with if he
yeah,
falls, then yeah, no issues, kind of taking him there.
yeah, and that's again what you just said. I think is critical, right? That he goes third a lot, and Andrews is the one that falls. So when we see that, it's like, okay, we're not going to end up with any McBride. But if we get a little bit further into the into the off season, we're getting closer to the season, and that switches, and McBride is the one that's falling down. And if McBride starts to slide down into that tier 2 of tight ends, that's when I would be very happy to take him. If he's in the 6th, 7th, even 8th round, I'll be all over that. So,
And that's a very possible thing because people are going to be all over Harrison in the coming weeks before the season. So I could definitely picture that.
yeah, and Harrison's already so high. I mean, I'm starting to see him go at the turn already of 12-team standard, and so in Superflex, he's going to go probably at the end of the 2nd, early 3rd round. And if that continues to get pushed up, we keep getting these incredibly positive reports out of camp, that could end up hurting McBride's draft stock, which, like I said, I don't necessarily think it should. I think, we're already at a point where we know Harrison's going to be the alpha, and McBride is going to be a very good number 2 option in the same way that Sam LaPorta is. So I'm not sure that we should be necessarily discounting McBride as we move further into the offseason here now. So we'll see. We'll see how it shakes out. I just wanted to make sure we made the positive case for McBride here too, though, because it's not just like we're avoiding McBride. So if you're in a draft with us and we take McBride, don't get mad that we kind of talked him down here. So going over going over everything, I think it's pretty clear, right, that the main target for both of us is Andrews, because he's usually going last to the group. We both have him third. It just seems like a natural fit to be targeting Andrews if you can get him a little later. Oh, I forgot to put your target in here. My bad.
Andrews.
And then we kind of went over the McBride part, right? That he's the hardest to judge, um, and it just makes it so why take the risk over somebody you feel more confident in, even if he does have more upside there. Um, and Kelce going in round 5 in a super flex league, right? It just makes it really hard for me, anyways, to pass on him. So if that kind of holds, then I say my target is Mark Andrews, but my target's going to be Kelce. There's going to be very few situations I can foresee that in the 5th round I wouldn't be looking to kind of take him there. We did a mock draft where we actually had to make that decision, and I wanted to take Kelce, and you wanted to take Brandon Ayuk. So just to give you an idea of in Superflex kind of what that decision is going to look like. So we ended up going Ayuk and picked Andrews around later. But if you want Kelce, that's where you're going to have to kind of make a decision on a player there, like Ayuk, right? And then LaPorta, full season, where he's going to be the guy, full off season where he's going to be the guy, and he just has a lot of room. It feels like to grow here and to command even more targets, and He could very easily be the number one option here at tight end. So even though I have him too, I do acknowledge that the upside here is very, very high for Laporta.
Awesome, man. I think that's it.
All right. With that, have a good one, guys. We'll talk to you in the next one.
Later.